Toto Wolff expresses his brutal anger towards Lewis Hamilton in a press conference after the Austrian Grand Prix. Stay until the end, only if you want to hear Lewis Hamilton's response. Pre-Gunter, a chat GPT. His entire professional trajectory, from the very first lap he completed in Formula One to the moment he stepped off the Mercedes pit wall for the last time, has been profoundly shaped by the precision, dominance, and unwavering excellence of Mercedes engineering. Every achievement that has adorned his career, be it a record-breaking pole position, a hard-fought victory on a rain-drenched Sunday, or a heartbreaking defeat in the dying laps of a Grand Prix, has been inked into the history books with the unmistakable imprint of the Silver Arrows. For over a decade, Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes were synonymous with excellence, almost indistinguishable in the way they operated: fluid, synchronized, methodical, powerful. He knew that car. He knew its voice, its rhythm, its temperament. The bond between man and machine had grown intimate. But that chapter is now closed. And in its place begins a vastly different narrative, one painted in crimson red. Now, for the first time in a career that has seen him conquer records and rewrite the standards of modern motorsport, Lewis Hamilton sits not behind the wheel of a machine born in Brackley, but rather one forged in Maranello, an entirely different beast, pulsating with a soul that speaks in a language he's still learning to understand. The roar of the engine is unfamiliar. The grip levels don't respond with the same precision. The communication with his engineers is tentative, still developing its own shorthand. It is a journey that's just begun, a process that cannot be rushed. And yet, the judgment has already begun to rain down like an unforgiving storm. Headlines dissect his every move. Pundits question his every decision. Fans, some of whom once sang his praises, now whisper doubts. The scrutiny is overwhelming and premature. But then, amid this mounting noise, came a voice from the past. A voice from a man who no longer shares Hamilton's garage, who no longer manages his race strategy or negotiates his contracts. And yet, Toto Wolff spoke. Just a handful of words. It's not fair to judge him yet. On the surface, the statement seemed calm, measured, even benign. But those who truly understand the psychological dynamics of Formula One, those who have followed Wolff's tenure at the helm of one of the sport's greatest dynasties, knew better. They felt the tremor beneath the surface. Because in Formula One, tone is not just tone, it is code. And when a man who has orchestrated an era of dominance speaks in that tone, every syllable is selected with surgical precision. To the casual observer, it appeared as nothing more than a former boss standing up for a former driver, a gesture of solidarity. But those attuned to the intricacies of F1 politics knew it for what it truly was, a masterstroke of strategic communication. Wolff wasn't merely offering support, he was sounding an alarm. Not to the press, not to the fans, but directly to the heart of Ferrari's command structure. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't an insult. It was a warning. A subtle, yet unmistakable challenge. A carefully packaged message that said, give him the time and space to recalibrate, to integrate, to thrive. Or watch as you smother the very greatness you sought to acquire. Not once did Wolff mention names. He didn't need to. The target of his message was crystal clear to anyone who understands the unspoken language of paddock diplomacy. It was an intervention, a coded plea veiled as an observation. Beneath his calm tone lay a reservoir of insight, of understanding, of deep strategic thinking. He knows what Hamilton is capable of. He knows what it takes to bring out the best in him. And perhaps more importantly, he knows what can destroy him, how easily the wrong environment can clip the wings of even the most gifted driver. He has seen it before. He hears the silence emanating from Ferrari's leadership in the wake of lackluster results. He notices the absence of public backing, the subtle detachment in post-race interviews. He observes how each lap time is scrutinized, each radio message is picked apart, each gesture on the podium is analyzed as if it were a confession. There is a narrative being constructed around Hamilton's transition, a narrative that, intentionally or not, focuses more on his imperfections than on his process of adaptation. And in that silence, in that vacuum of support, lies the danger. Because Hamilton is not just a driver. He is a complex, emotionally driven, fiercely competitive force. And to get the best out of him requires more than just a fast car. It requires understanding. It requires patience. It requires belief. Wolff, more than anyone, knows the immense psychological toll this sport takes on its stars. He knows how narratives can bend reality, how pressure can morph into doubt. And so when he spoke, He did so not as a rival team principal, but as someone who has navigated those psychological battlegrounds alongside Hamilton for nearly a decade. His message wasn't meant to ignite controversy, it was meant to protect, to shield, to remind the world, and perhaps more specifically Ferrari, that greatness cannot be forced. It must be nurtured, and that even legends need room to breathe. What made his words land with such devastating force was the sheer fact that he chose to speak at all. He didn't have to. There was no reason for him to intervene. Hamilton no longer dons the black overalls of Mercedes. He no longer calls Toto boss. But still, Wolff couldn't remain silent. That act alone carried more meaning than the words themselves. Because it revealed something deeper, something unshakable. A bond forged not just in victory, but in understanding. A respect that transcends contracts and team affiliations. A legacy that still means something, even when paths diverge. This moment, more than any statistic, more than any lap time, underscores the quiet power of respect in Formula One. It highlights how the most significant statements are often the ones least adorned. And it reminds everyone watching that Hamilton's story is still being written. That his Ferrari chapter, however turbulent its beginning, is far from its final act. And perhaps, just perhaps, the one man who knows how that story can still unfold is the one who once stood beside him. Not in red, but in silver. Hamilton may now wear the red of Ferrari, but the spirit, the beating heart of Mercedes, of those silver arrows that carried him to countless glories, has never once let go of him. His legacy, his history, and his impact are still etched into every corridor of Brackley and every voice that dares to speak of greatness in Formula One. There is a kind of reverence there, an invisible thread of respect that cannot be replicated with a contract or manufactured with press releases. It's in their DNA. They remember. They honor. They uphold everything he stood for and still stands for. That's not marketing. That's not nostalgia. That is loyalty, in its rawest and most authentic form. That is identity forged in fire, in rain-soaked victories, in championship-deciding battles. It's something far beyond statistics and surface-level achievements. It's a connection built over time, tested by adversity, and proven in triumph. And that is what Ferrari has yet to understand, let alone embrace. So when Toto Wolff, with his usual composure laced with pointed intent, quietly said, "It's not fair," it wasn't a throwaway line. It wasn't even about race pace or tire degradation. It was a dagger aimed straight at the ethos of Ferrari. It was a challenge, a provocation, a question that cuts to the very soul of competition. Do you merely use champions, or do you cherish them? Do you parade them for the brand, or do you fight for their dignity when they falter? Toto's words were not for Hamilton alone. They were a mirror held up to Maranello, and what reflected back was something cold, something transactional. Something that lacked the human warmth Mercedes has always offered their knight in shining silver. And now, that question lingers in the air like a storm cloud refusing to break. If Mercedes, having parted ways with Hamilton on the track, can still hold him in the highest esteem, can still speak of him as family, as legend, as irreplaceable, then what exactly is stopping Ferrari from doing the same? Why is there a void where adulation should be? Why is there calculation where there should be camaraderie? The world sees it. The paddock senses it. The contrast is too stark, too glaring to ignore. The tension, the unease, it isn't some fabrication of media spin. It lives and breathes in every corner of this season's story. It thrums beneath the surface of every Grand Prix weekend, just loud enough to unsettle but not enough to explode. You can hear it in the tones of the engineers, in the sidelong glances during debriefs, in the subtle shifts of posture during press conferences. While Charles Leclerc continues to perform, to deliver consistent results and secure valuable podiums, Hamilton remains in a strange limbo, victorious only in a single sprint, a win that should have reignited something within Ferrari but instead was met with muted acknowledgement. No eruptive congratulations. No passionate declarations. Just a nod, a handshake, a clinical note in the race report. And in that silence, the message was deafening: you're not our champion, not yet. Inside the red walls of Maranello, the comparison between teammates is not just inevitable, it's institutional. Leclerc is the son of the system. The driver they've sculpted, supported, and entrusted with their future. He is fluent in more than just Italian. He speaks the culture, the rhythm, the unspoken rules of Ferrari. He moves through the garage like someone born to be there. He doesn't just drive the car, he belongs to it. Hamilton, for all his accolades, all his world titles, is still seen as the interloper, the disruptor of the status quo, the element they don't fully control. He's trying to adapt, yes, but adaptation takes time, and time is rarely afforded to outsiders. He's navigating not only a new car and a new team, but an entire organizational psyche that has long had a way of doing things. His cadence doesn't match theirs yet, and every misalignment is magnified. Every radio call that sounds unsure, every lap that falls short, becomes ammunition. The margin for error is razor-thin, and unlike Leclerc, he is not granted the benefit of the doubt. Every 10th lost is a referendum on his career. Every race behind his teammate births a new headline. Is this the beginning of the end? Has he overstayed his era? This isn't just pressure, it's a relentless trial by perception. Every strategy meeting is a battleground for trust. Every media appearance is a test of allegiance. Every whisper in the paddock becomes a storm of speculation. This isn't about racing anymore, not entirely. It's about how you frame a story, how you protect a legacy, how you treat greatness when it's no longer at its absolute peak. It's about optics, influence, and internal politics masquerading as professionalism. And through it all, Hamilton must keep driving, keep smiling, keep proving that he's still the driver who changed the sport. But how do you prove yourself when the applause is delayed, the support conditional, and the admiration rationed? Mercedes never needed a reminder. They never had to be told who Lewis Hamilton was. He shaped their dynasty. They gave him the car, but he gave them immortality. That bond, once forged, doesn't dissolve with a signature on a Ferrari contract. And that's the difference that Ferrari may never fully grasp, not until they realize that legacy isn't built in isolation. It's upheld by those who choose to honor it, even when the man himself has moved on. And right now, that choice is being made by Mercedes, not Maranello. Ferrari isn't merely requesting that Lewis Hamilton perform. They are making a relentless demand for validation, an unspoken but ever-present insistence that he continually justify his place within the Scuderia. His 7 world championships, his status as one of the most decorated and iconic figures in the history of the sport, none of that seems to buy him immunity or even the basic courtesy of patience. With each Grand Prix, it becomes more evident that Hamilton isn't being integrated, he's being assessed. Constantly. Perpetually. As though every lap, every sector time, every post-race debrief is a pass-or-fail test on whether he belongs in red. It's not a welcome. It's a trial by fire. It's a culture of pressure without a cushion, expectation without empathy, and results without room for recalibration. This is exactly the kind of environment Toto Wolff predicted would emerge. Not because he had a crystal ball, but because he's seen this movie before. He understands, at a visceral level, what happens when a driver is robbed of emotional security. He knows what it feels like when trust is replaced by skepticism and performance is judged in a vacuum, without any allowance for adaptation, growth, or psychological safety. He's watched champions unravel under the weight of scrutiny that leaves no room for imperfection. And in his years leading Mercedes, Toto didn't just observe, he learned, adjusted, and built around those very dangers. He crafted a framework where performance and pressure coexisted with protection and belief. He constructed not just a team, but a sanctuary. A place where the human being behind the visor mattered just as much as the telemetry. Look no further than Kimi Antonelli. The young protege, still navigating the steep and unforgiving learning curve of elite motorsport, continues to make rookie errors. He locks up. He overdrives. He occasionally misjudges conditions. But what's the response from Mercedes? Not condemnation. Not thinly veiled frustration. Instead, they offer him mentorship, encouragement, time. They highlight his future, not his flaws. They see his arc, not just his present. That is what belief looks like. That is how world champions are molded, when potential is met with patience, when mistakes are recognized as stepping stones rather than landmines. Contrast that with what's happening at Ferrari, and the gap is staggering. The support system that envelopes Antonelli at Mercedes is conspicuously absent for Hamilton in Maranello. The 7-time world champion, with more experience than most team principals on the grid, is being treated not as a seasoned titan of the sport, but as an ongoing hypothesis, something to be tested, dissected, monitored. Every missed apex is magnified. Every race that doesn't end on the podium becomes an indictment. There is no grace period, no recognition of the need for assimilation into a fundamentally different racing culture. No allowance is made for the fact that Hamilton, for the first time in over a decade, is driving in an environment where he doesn't know every voice in the garage, every quirk of the car, every nuance of the team's operational DNA. And therein lies the problem, a fundamental imbalance that speaks volumes about the divergent philosophies at play. What Antonelli is being granted as a novice, Hamilton is being denied as a legend. He is not being welcomed into the Ferrari family so much as he is being monitored as an outsider. Not integrated, but interrogated. Not supported, but scrutinized. It's a cultural fault line, a chasm between two organizational mindsets, one that builds confidence from the inside out, and another that chips away at it from the outside in. Toto Wolff is no stranger to these dynamics. He didn't just inherit Mercedes driver culture, he architected it. From the ashes of internal tension and public disarray, he forged a structure defined by mutual respect, psychological safety, and long-term vision. Under his leadership, Mercedes didn't just produce champions, they protected them. Hamilton didn't just thrive there, he became a living embodiment of the team's ethos. He wasn't simply a name on a race result, he was the soul of an era. He was championed not only when he won, but also when he struggled. His humanity was allowed to coexist with his talent. And now that very humanity is being stripped down to a spreadsheet. At Ferrari, he's no longer the co-author of a dynasty, he's a variable in a lab experiment. Every interaction feels transactional. Every comment from management sounds conditional. The same grace that was extended to Charles Leclerc in his early years, and is now being wrapped around Carlos Sainz's departure saga, is glaringly absent when it comes to Hamilton. It's not just a difference in treatment, it's a difference in belief systems. Toto isn't simply defending his former star driver. What he's doing is exposing the underlying fracture lines in Ferrari's internal machinery. He's holding up a mirror and forcing the F1 world to look beyond the shiny red livery and storied past. He's peeling back the romanticism and revealing a truth that few want to acknowledge, that without a foundation of trust, even the most talented drivers can be diminished. He understands the mental cost of competing in an ecosystem where doubt is louder than encouragement, where silence speaks louder than praise, where every race feels like a verdict rather than a journey. Wolff has watched Hamilton operate at his peak, seen the intensity of his process, the vulnerability behind his confidence, the delicate balance between ambition and self-doubt that exists even in the most seasoned of athletes. And he knows, perhaps better than anyone, that such a driver cannot be cultivated through criticism alone. You cannot pressure someone into greatness, you can only unlock it through belief. At Mercedes, that belief was constant, unwavering, unconditional. At Ferrari, it feels transactional, brittle, conditional. The difference is not just philosophical, it's personal. For Hamilton, it is the contrast between being empowered and being examined. For Toto, it is the pain of watching something once nurtured now being put under a microscope by people who may never fully understand what it took to build in the first place. And for Formula One as a whole, it is a reminder that behind every lap time, behind every pit stop and strategy call, there is a human being, one who thrives not only on talent and machinery, but also on trust, care, and the invisible architecture of belief. And this was far from a coincidence. It wasn't mere encouragement, nor was it a spontaneous show of solidarity. It was precision. It was strategic maneuvering of the highest order, a deliberate act woven with intent and foresight. Toto Wolff, the ever-calculating mastermind, didn't simply express support, he orchestrated a scenario. He laid a trap, subtle yet devastatingly effective. He knew exactly what kind of tremors his words would send through the paddock and beyond. He foresaw the chain reaction, the dramatic headlines, the frenzied breakdowns by pundits across media platforms, and perhaps most critically, the brewing storm inside the scarlet walls of Maranello. He recognized that silence from Ferrari would no longer be neutral, it would now scream with implication. He forced them into a corner where their every non-action would be interpreted as betrayal, and their every hesitation would be seen as vulnerability, not prudence. In a single move, Wolff didn't just back Hamilton. He transferred the emotional and political burden entirely onto Ferrari's shoulders. He redirected the glare of public scrutiny, using it not as a shield, but as a sword. What was once a narrative centered on Hamilton's adaptation now pivots toward Ferrari's accountability. In the world of Formula One, where optics often outweigh output, perception becomes an invisible currency, one that can determine outcomes before a single lap is turned. And Toto has been playing this game long enough to recognize every contour of the battlefield. He remembers watching Fernando Alonso's hopeful arrival at Ferrari, brimming with ambition, full of fire. But Ferrari's internal rigidity gradually smothered that flame. The system, entrenched and stubborn, drained him not just of energy but of belief. Then came Sebastian Vettel, who faced the same arc, embraced it first, celebrated even, only to be subtly pushed to the periphery when results became inconsistent. He too was eroded by that same resistance to change. Even Michael Schumacher, the legend whose name still echoes through the sport's history, only broke through because he was granted something few others have been: the runway to rebuild the team around himself, the patience to craft Ferrari in his own vision. But the modern iteration of Ferrari operates differently. Today's regime does not cultivate, it demands. It does not nurture legacy, it expects immediate legend. It has little time for slow ascension and even less tolerance for faltering starts. And this is where danger quietly begins to wrap itself around Hamilton's tenure. Because what starts as adoration can quickly shift. The banners, the cheers, the media frenzy, they all celebrate the arrival of a 7-time world champion. But how long will that admiration last if the podiums aren't immediate? How short is the leash when the machinery doesn't deliver on its promises? The concern isn't hypothetical, it's cyclical. We've watched this exact pattern unfold more times than the sport cares to admit. The initial wave of optimism crashes into the harsh rocks of pressure. The honeymoon phase evaporates with a string of unspectacular finishes. The engineers retreat, the leadership grows cautious, and suddenly the loudest support becomes an eerie silence. Whispers of doubt take root. The driver, once the hero, becomes the scapegoat for deeper structural issues. This is what Wolff is laying bare, not merely to expose Ferrari's weaknesses but to caution everyone watching, everyone invested. He is illuminating the conditions under which greatness withers. He's not just signaling to those in red, he's speaking to every corner of the paddock, every fan, every stakeholder. If there is no cultural transformation within Ferrari, if they cannot exhibit consistent, unshakable belief in the driver they so ceremoniously welcomed, then they risk dismantling their own revival. They threaten to undermine the very success they claim to be chasing. And as the championship intensifies, this situation transcends mere race weekends. It becomes a running referendum on Ferrari's soul. Every upcoming Grand Prix becomes more than a contest of speed, it becomes a test of integrity, of unity, of purpose. Each strategic call from the pit wall will be interpreted not just as a tactical move, but as a message. Every interview, every press release, every public expression, or lack thereof, will carry the weight of symbolism. And Hamilton, for all his experience, isn't detached from these signals. He has navigated this political landscape before. He has felt when the energy shifts, when trust becomes transactional, when loyalty is conditional. He is attuned to the unspoken language of team dynamics. He is watching it unfold again, this time in new colors, but with familiar undertones. And so, beneath the roar of engines and the bright lights of the paddock, an invisible contest begins. One not of pace, but of poise. One not of tire strategy, but of psychological clarity. Toto Wolff, in planting that verbal seed, has accelerated this test. He has cast doubt not on Hamilton's capability, but on Ferrari's constancy. He has transformed the narrative from performance to principles. And now the world is watching, not to see if Hamilton will rise, but to see if Ferrari can finally evolve. Because greatness doesn't just need talent, it requires belief. Not momentary, not conditional, but enduring belief, through triumph and turbulence alike. If Ferrari persists in treating Lewis Hamilton not as a foundational pillar of their future, but as a mere visitor passing through their legacy, then any hope of forging an unshakable bond between driver and team becomes nothing more than wishful thinking. Hamilton is not a man who simply drives a car, he's a man who reshapes institutions, redefines standards, and recalibrates the limits of what is considered possible in Formula One. But none of that matters if he senses that his presence is tolerated rather than celebrated. Respect isn't just about public praise, it's about alignment, shared vision, and a mutual willingness to risk everything in pursuit of greatness. Without that, the whole structure is hollow. Once a driver begins to feel like an outsider, like a passenger instead of a partner, the unraveling begins, not dramatically, but insidiously, piece by piece. It starts with small hesitations, cautious words, subtle changes in tone during debriefs, and slowly snowballs into something more dangerous: detachment. And in Formula One, when detachment sets in, recovery is almost impossible. History, relentless and unforgiving, has recorded these moments again and again. Brilliant drivers with immense potential slowly fading into mediocrity, not because they lacked skill, but because the chemistry with their teams was never nurtured. When belief vanishes, when trust disintegrates, performance drops. Not always in lap times or straight-line speed, but in rhythm, intuition, the raw flow state that separates champions from competitors. And this summer stretch in the 2025 season isn't merely a sequence of races, it is an inflection point for Ferrari. A moment that carries the weight of their past failures, their present doubts, and their future ambitions. This is where declarations must turn into demonstrations. Promises must evolve into proof. For too long, Ferrari has spoken of building something monumental. Now, they must prove they are capable of sustaining it. Because if they falter now, the cost won't simply be a few lost podiums or a distant Constructors' Championship dream. It could mean the irreversible departure of a driver who still has the power to transform their fate. Losing Hamilton isn't just about losing speed or marketing clout. It's about losing the one driver on the current grid who still carries with him an aura of transformation, a weight of legend, and the psychological edge that comes with being a 7-time world champion who still believes he has unfinished business. Letting go of that isn't just a misstep, it's a strategic disaster, one that could echo across generations. Ferrari knows how long they wandered the wilderness before they brought Michael Schumacher to Maranello. And they also know what happened once they gave him everything he needed. Are they willing to risk waiting another decade for someone like that to come around again? Which brings everything back to that single razor-sharp sentence from Toto Wolff. It wasn't a misfire. It wasn't emotionally charged or carelessly spoken. It was calibrated with precision, aimed with intention, and deployed with a kind of political sophistication that has made Wolff not just a team principal but a kingmaker in modern Formula One. His words weren't about defending Hamilton's legacy, they were about forcing Ferrari to look at their own reflection. And what they saw wasn't a picture of dominance or unity. It was a mirror showing fracture lines, internal hesitations, and a lack of cohesive belief in the project they claimed to be building. Toto wasn't just speaking to a media room, he was addressing Ferrari's boardroom, their race engineers, their sponsors, and most of all, their legion of fans, the Tifosi. His message was clear, veiled in diplomacy but laced with provocation. He knows the game. He knows how stories are shaped in the media, how momentum is born not just on track but in perception, narrative, and psychological warfare. His message sliced through the paddock like a scalpel. And those who have been around long enough to recognize the signs knew exactly what he was doing. He was issuing a challenge. Not to Lewis. Not to Mercedes. But to Ferrari: show us who you really are. Back your man, or lose him forever. Now that sentence hangs in the air at every press conference, in every garage meeting, in every executive lounge in Maranello and beyond. The question is no longer just about race results or telemetry data. It's about identity. Will Ferrari, a team so rich in heritage yet so often paralyzed by internal doubts, finally evolve into a modern racing force willing to trust deeply in the people they bring aboard? Or will they once again allow history to repeat itself, watching another golden opportunity dissolve under the weight of their own hesitation? Because here's the truth: the storm isn't coming, it has already begun. Every glance between Hamilton and his engineers, every carefully worded statement in the press, every strategy call that seems slightly off, it's all part of a much bigger narrative. A narrative that fans, insiders, and rival teams are watching with bated breath. This is more than a driver adapting to a new car. This is about a dynasty trying to reinvent itself. And the longer they delay full commitment, the more fragile their foundation becomes. The clock is ticking. And while the Scuderia deliberates, Hamilton waits, but not idly. He's observing, calculating, keeping his options open. Because for a man who's conquered so much, loyalty must be earned, not assumed. And he won't be left standing in the shadows of empty promises. So if you believe Ferrari must act with conviction, if you believe Hamilton deserves more than symbolic support, that he deserves real trust, real backing, and real alignment, then let your voice be heard. Comment below: I stand with Lewis. This isn't just about a championship, it's about the soul of a team, the future of a legacy, and a battle for identity in a sport where history only remembers the bold. And this saga? It's far from over. The engines haven't even hit full throttle. The storm has just begun to rage.